All right, well, today is the day where we finally are going to be doing the first pulls in the turbo K-swap Cefiro since we blew it up over a year ago. It's going to be our first time getting to enjoy this thing and actually lean on it now that we have a fully built engine, rods, pistons, and a stronger transmission. So I'm pretty excited. I've driven this thing around, I've putt-putted it, but we haven't really got to rip on it yet. And the time is now to finally stretch this thing's legs and see what it's capable of. However, before we can do that, we got a couple little things to finish up. So since this is a fresh motor with bearings and rings and all of that stuff, we did have to break it in some. I did want to do a little bit of just casual street driving break-in miles, which we've now done enough to where I'm happy with it. It's not 500 miles or whatever people suggest. I did 20, but good enough for me. So before we really wring this thing's neck, we're gonna wanna get that break-in oil out of there. And while we get it out, we are gonna take that opportunity to redo one of our oil cooler lines. It's in the way of getting the bumper back on. We've got this cleft chin going on. It's driving me nuts. We need a bumper on this thing because we were taking it drifting here in a few days. So along with that, we got a few other upgrades to do, a few things to finish out, and then we can try to go wring this thing's neck and hope that it all works out well. And we don't need to do much changes to the tune, aside from making it make more torque now that we can, now that we have the built bottom end and we're not worried about the limits of the stock bottom end, and then we can take it drifting. So that's the plan. Before we can even start on this, we got to get this thing out of the way. So my LS Miata here has been stranded on the lift since after round 3 of Clutch Kickers last year. It's been a while. We broke it. You can see the axle's hanging out of it. This is on the list of things to get fixed and sorted back out, but we got to get the alternator back on so that we can get this thing out of the shop, get this thing up on the lift so we can actually work on it. So you know the deal. Enough jibber jabber, let's get into it. We gotta swap the smallest pulley on. We had a big pulley on the Vet and it didn't charge enough at idle, so we switched for the small pulley, which we stole off the Miata's alternator. Now we got a replacement to go on the Miata's alternator. Get this thing out of our way here. Let's see if this thing starts up. So the first thing we needed to do was drain the oil out of it, and while we're there, check the magnetic drain plug and see how much material we had on it. Now, fortunately for a freshly built engine, there really wasn't all that much on there. I was surprised by how little we actually had on the drain plug. So with the oil drained, we could start taking the line off and getting everything capped so we can get ready to rebuild this one line that's in the way of getting the bumper back on. I also wanted to go ahead and pull the filter off. We've got a pretty cheap filter on here just for break-in. We've got a Wix filter to go on, but I've never used this filter on this car with this filter housing, and though it's the same O-ring diameter, the same thread pitch, it's a much bigger canister. So I wanted to make sure it was going to fit, and in case it didn't, we could go get another one and not hold ourselves up. So with that out of the way, it's time to rebuild these lines. So fortunately, we're going to be able to reuse these fittings. Now, we remade these lines when we were rebuilding the car after the catastrophic failure, because anytime you have an engine failure and you have have oil, contaminated oil, cycling through your system, you want to replace all the stuff that could trap those contaminants so they don't go right back through your new engine when you start it up. So we rebuilt the lines, but we did it without the front bumper in play, and it turns out one of them gets in the way of the front bumper bracket. So I wanted to go ahead and put the front bumper on before I finalize this line. That way I can make sure the line length I have now is definitely going to work, because I don't want to redo this line twice. I also needed to double check that the other line that was there was going to work, in fact, with the bumper bracket, and we didn't need to remake that one as well. So everything looks like it's going to fit. Everything looks like it's going to work. So we can go ahead and cut this line, cinch the fitting down, and get it installed back in the car. Now, fortunately, these lines and fittings that I'm working with are really, really easy to deal with. They're probably the easiest ones I've ever dealt with. So what could have been a bit of a pain of a project was pretty easy, pretty straightforward. So we get the filter filled up. I always like to pre-fill my filters if I can. You know, sometimes they're in an orientation where you just can't, because it's just going to spill out when you go to put the filter on. But in this situation, we can. So we got that pre-filled, filled the engine with oil. I'm trying out this new oil. It was part of the prize at a drift competition I won, and I've had it sitting on the shelf forever because I usually just use the same oil and everything. But I figured, fresh engine, let's give it a shot in this thing. We used the same brand break-in oil, so might as well try it out, see what happens. Man, what a difference the front bumper makes on this car. I mean, cars in general are pretty ugly without the front bumper, but this one especially is extra ugly without the front bumper. So glad to have that done. Got all the other stuff I wanted to do finished. Got our oil line redone so we could fit the bumper. Oil change, new filter. So the last thing I want to do under here before we go take this thing for a spin and do some pulls with it is a good nut and bolt check. I haven't checked this stuff in over a year because the car hasn't been driven in really over a year besides some light testing. So I want to check everything over. When you've got an engine that vibrates and when you've got Heim joints and stuff, it's really important to keep an eye on everything because stuff will come loose. So I want to do that now while the car's still on the lift, because I'm not going to want to put it back on the lift to do it once I take it off. Then I just got to get in the laptop, tinker with the tune a little bit. I want to put some timing back in the cam down low, and I want to put the boost controller at 0 and just see what boost it makes on wastegate spring, just to make sure we're good and everything's working and functioning, and then we can start adding the boost in. But I'm excited to do some pulls in this thing. However, it is wet out, it did rain. So in the meantime, I want to take this thing for a rip. I got to tinker with it a little bit. I want to pull the air filter off and see what it sounds like induction noise wise without the filter. I think it drowns out a lot of the noise. Now long term, obviously I'm going to keep the filter, but I just want to hear it. I just want to see what it's like. I've been tinkering with this thing since the last episode. I've been playing with the cam timing to see what makes the most power and what makes the best power band just by seat of the pants, because that's kind of the point of this car. And man, I've been having a good time driving this thing. Now we also got some parts in. Finally got my injector plugs in to plug up my injector ports. So this engine, the injectors port directly into the head, not into the manifold. So even when you change the manifold, you still got open ports. And right now, I've got some backwards vacuum caps shoved in there. Not the ideal scenario, so these should seal it up proper and we won't have to worry about that anymore. And then we can go drive it. So enough drip jabber. Back to work, / let's take this thing for a cruise because it's fun and I love it. Well, that was underwhelming. It did sound a little different, a little bit louder, but I thought that was blocking a lot more sound since it doesn't have a crazy amount of induction noise. So we'll leave the filter on for now. I mean, we're gonna put the Webers back on eventually anyway, so it doesn't really matter. I was just curious. My Speedo did ironically quit working. It was funny because this car had a working Speedo and not a working tach because I'm waiting for the tach adapter. Now the Speedo doesn't work. Old car thing, so we'll have to work on that, get that fixed whenever we dig into the diff and all that stuff. We've still got some chassis stuff to do to this car to get it sorted, but I've just been so happy to finally be able to drive this car around and enjoy it. And it's so sick right now with the carbs and the cams. I'm loving it. So I'm hesitant to tear into it, but we got to do what we got to do. We got to get it 100% right, and then we can enjoy it as much as we want. I need a little time to have fun with it. So that being said, back to this thing. I've done my nut and bolt check, so let's drop it down and get to change up the tune-up, and then we can take it for a rip, and hopefully this thing holds together. Because if it doesn't, we need to know now so we don't take it to the track and find out that it doesn't hold together. But this is kind of the moment of truth. Did I build this engine right? Is it sorted now? Stay tuned. Oh, man. Both fans working, cools down quick. And it's not particularly cool outside. Probably like 75. Change the tune up a little bit. We can work with now. All right, well, I figured out that my O2 control is zeroed out. So I just spent a bunch more time driving the Cefiro around. It was leaning out just a little bit, and I didn't want to stay in it all the way to redline until we had that sorted. So once we got back, we took a little break from that to fix another major annoyance on the 86. I've been enjoying driving this thing, but there's still some problems. One of which being the tire on the passenger side going flat. You can see I put some slime in there to try to just get me by, but it wasn't happening. I was dreading mounting these tires because it's such a small tire and needs such a big stretch, but we got super lucky. This thing popped onto the bead first try. I was sure by looking at it once it was on there and seeing how far it needed to stretch that we were gonna have to get creative and use the old fire explosion method, which is pretty hit or miss. So I was super stoked when it popped right on. I went to do the second one and we weren't quite as lucky with the other side. It did not want to seat while clamped into the machine. I couldn't get the one bead to seat to get the other bead to pop on, so we had to get a little creative to get this thing to pop on the bead, not clamped in, which is a little sketchy, but at the end of the day, we got it. All right, well, we've just been tinkering. This thing is running a lot better. I am really happy about that. I found a table that was zeroed out for the wideband learning self-tuning setup. And basically with that table zeroed out, it wasn't doing anything. So whatever the tune was, it just stayed there as opposed to gradually changing it. Now, I know a lot of tuners, especially who've been around for a long time, they like to turn the learn off. But for me, I like having the learn on because it's an amazing tool. You know, I use it in the Vet, the Miata, the turbo truck, this car now. Basically what it's doing is it's reading the wideband, comparing that to your fuel table, and then making adjustments. So there's a whole table that corrects whatever you've got in the fuel table. So all the time you're driving, flooring it, whatever, it's constantly reading and adjusting and modifying your table, and then you can just add that to the table, and then that's your baseline. And this is great because with modern ECUs, you have so much resolution, you have so many cells that going in there by hand and just tinkering with each one after reading a data log, it would take forever, whereas you just let the ECU do it. So anyway, point is, I got it turned back on, got it set back up, and it's done a lot to clean up the way the car drives in weird areas and stuff. So I'm really happy about that. We just gotta keep driving it, let it keep learning and tuning itself. So on the front of this thing, I did finally mount my rear tires. I've been dreading it, and it really wasn't that bad. This is a 185 on like a 9-inch wide wheel, and went on no problem. The only downside is it's a different brand tire because that's what I could get. And even though they're the same size, they're actually a good bit smaller. You can see our fitment ain't so hella flush anymore. The only thing that bothers me is that they're smaller than the front tires. And generally you'd want, you know, if you're gonna have any stagger, you'd want it towards the rear. So that might bother me enough to flip flop them, but for now it's fine. We got a tire that doesn't leak down every 30 minutes. We finally got in the mail for this thing, tach adapter. Been waiting on this. I want to get this hooked up and see if we can't get our tach working so we can actually see what RPM this thing's at. I haven't been brave enough to take it to Redline because I want to make sure that Redline is where I set it and I'm not just, you know, flying blind. So let's try to get this installed. Should be pretty easy. All the wiring is right here. I left it all close by so that way it'd be easy to... So let's get to it. So the reason we need a tach adapter is because this car being a little bit older, the signal coming out of the MSD box, which is what is controlling our ignition, it's what's reading where the engine is in time and telling the coil when to fire, and thus giving us our tach signal, is not the right output to feed the tachometer on the instrument cluster. So this box basically converts the signal coming from the MSD and changes it to something that the tach on our dash can read, and hopefully by the end of this, we'll have a working tachometer. All right, let's see if this works. All right, well, it seems to be working. Now that we have an actual gauge, a tach, I want to really try to rev this thing out, bring it up close to Redline. I've tried to before, but I had no idea where I was in the RPM range. I didn't want to risk over revving it if the rev limiter didn't work or something. So now that we can see it, we can try to really wring this thing's neck and see what it sounds like all the way up top. So let's get to it. We pulled all the way up, boys. See, around here, I thought I was at like $4 grand. I'm only at $3. So it makes a good bit of oomph down at $3 grand. Feels pretty healthy. Happy for a little 1.6. It chirped the tires, little 185s, but hey, this thing's so fun, man. Oh, this thing's so fun, man. I love it. Well, I really gotta stop driving this thing until I fix the front wheel bearing, which is pretty shot, and the rear diff stuff. But at least we've got it pretty sorted now. I got a working tach, oil pressure gauge works, coolant temp, fuel gauge, it runs good, it revs out. Happy with this thing. It's been real fun to just tinker with it. Got my little leather tool pouch with me in case I need to do any tuning. well, tach adapter was a success, works perfect. If only we can get the speedo working, we'd have every gauge on this thing working. I did look at the cable when I had it up on the lift, and it's all attached still. It's a mechanical linkage to the speedo, so I would think the cable's got to be broken. But yeah, got that done. I also went ahead and got my wheels and tires mounted for the Cefiro. Got 3 pairs for this weekend of 235s. Now, I was planning to switch this car to 265s, but the 265s I got for it, I had to steal for the vet for the LZ Invitational. So luckily, I still had a few 235s laying around. 3 sets of these NT 555 G2s should be enough. These Nittos they last forever. It takes me a long time to kill 1 set. So 3 sets should net us 35, 40 laps, which I don't even know if we'll do that many laps. Hopefully the car holds together. As long as it does its job, we'll definitely have enough tires to have a full day of fun. So that being said, before I start getting ready to load this thing up in the trailer, I want to clean both these cars. Neither of them have been washed in over a year. You can see just how dirty the Cefiro is. And it's one of those things, they get dirty gradually. You don't realize how dirty they are until you clean them, and you don't realize how much more you like them when they're clean until you clean them. So I'm not a huge car wash kind of guy. I'm not a detailed kind of guy. It's not really my thing, but it does make a difference. So let's get these cleaned up. Like I said, you never realize just how dirty something is until you wash it. Now, this car sat inside, but it still gets dusty and dirty and grimy, and what a difference it made to clean this thing up. As you can see, the Cefiro still filthy. This should be a really satisfying one. This car I washed after we blew it up, got all the fire extinguisher stuff off it, but it's just been sitting, pushed around, pushed into the corner, sat outside, inside, and they get dirty. Cars get dirty whether you drive them or not, so hey, you might as well drive them. So anyway, we started getting this thing cleaned off. We're not going too crazy here, and I am not a professional at this at all. I am not good at washing cars. It's one of those things I never really learned the right way how to do, and I never really cared. But we get that thing cleaned up, and then I thought, you know what? While we've got everything out here, let's get the Miata cleaned up too. It's been cleaned the most recent of the 3, and is the dirtiest of the 3 because it gets used and used hard. So this thing was filthy. We had to get the windows popped back in it because it doesn't have roll-up windows because of the NASCAR bars, but I did make it to where I could pop the windows back in it. They still leak, which is why I kind of dread washing this car. You end up getting a lot of water on the inside of it, but it needs to be cleaned. If it's going to sit around, if it's going to just not get used for a little while, it might as well be clean while it's doing it. So we get this thing rinsed off. A lot of tire comes off these cars when you clean them, and it makes a bit of a mess, but it does make a world of difference to see them all cleaned up and shiny. So with that done, it's time. It's time to load the Cefiro in the trailer. So we need to get the trailer pulled out so that we can get the car in the trailer and get ready to go have some fun with it. Got the old Cefiro loaded up in the trailer. I always forget this car has the power folding mirrors, which is very convenient when you put a car in a trailer and you need to walk past it like this. Got 2 wheels here, 2 in the trunk, because where I normally store my wheels and tires is still full of vet wheels and tires from the LZ Invitational. So a little tight on space, no point in rearranging just for 2 pairs of wheels. So yeah, this thing's loaded. I think as far as this thing's concerned, we are ready to go. All right, well, I said I wasn't gonna drive this thing around anymore until I fixed the diff issue and the wheel bearing. Definitely in dire need. However, I couldn't resist. The weather's too nice out. I took it for another drive. Just a little cruise, and man, I gotta say, what a world difference it is to drive this thing with the tach. Because when you know that you've got 2,000 more RPM to go and you stay in it, you realize the dang thing's actually pretty peppy. Like, it felt really good. I mean, you know, we'll see when we go to drift it. That'll be the real test of how much power it actually has. But for its main purpose, rip around car, just having fun, just the noises and the nostalgia, it feels pretty freaking dialed. I'm really happy to have this thing running proper, working proper. Still got a few little oil leaks and stuff we'll take care of, but once we get the diff and wheel bearing stuff sorted, we can just drive the thing around a little bit, enjoy it before we tear it apart again to paint the bay and make it look all nice. But I'm happy with the progress so far. So that being said, Cefiro's loaded in the trailer, ready to go. So next thing you do is go drifting. I'm really excited to see how this thing performs. It's gonna be my first time driving it in over a year since I blew it up. First time with the built motor, first time with the T56 and all the other changes we made. Should be a pretty different car, and I'm excited to see what it feels like and hope that it holds up and all is well. Hopefully it's a day driving, not a day wrenching, but I think we're in good shape. We'll see though, you never know. So that being said, we're pretty much out of time for projects. Had to just jump back and forth between them both, just knocking out little stuff. So I'm gonna go ahead and end it here, but I do hope to see you guys for that. And we got some exciting projects coming down the pipeline. So I hope to see you guys in the future, but for now, that's it. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. Goodbye.